Hey YouTube, this is going to be a video that I'm making in order to help me organize some of my thoughts on the Midnight expansion reveal at Gamescom, as well as the direction. And it's going to be a pretty long form video of me rambling in probably monotone fashion. So I did throw up some gameplay of me leveling through Island Expedition solo on a rogue. I'd also like to lead with a bit of a disclosure that I'm a solo player and I've been playing solo for basically my whole time playing WoW. It's been spent playing solo, so maybe if someone does see this, they'll find maybe my perspective a little bit more interesting, because the recent expansions have had a pretty large focus on solo gameplay, or at least catering to solo players. So maybe they might find whoever's watching this might find my perspective a little bit more interesting than the average player. I find that when it comes to feedback, solo players are not really the easiest communities to gauge, and as opposed to the group players, which I think it's much easier to find what they think and what their impressions are. So maybe this will help. On the left of the screen is a list of all the things they announced during their reveal, and we'll kind of go through them one by one so I can give my opinions on them. First is story. This was much more positive to me because it was more of a focus on factions and what their interests are and what their conflicts are, rather than the personal experiences of characters and whatever feelings or interpersonal conflicts they might have, right? We weren't watching Anduin cry for like 5 minutes, right? I don't think anyone was really all that interested to hear about what Anduin's thoughts are on the Shadowlands, but I think if they do want to tell stories about whatever feelings the characters might have, it's fine if they want to do that in a book or something, I don't know, but not in trailer form, right? No one really wants to see that in the big cinematic reveals, like Thrall comforting Anduin was kind of weird, right? Instead, what we got was what is, in my opinion, the most interesting part of Warcraft storytelling, which is factions and what their interests are. It's much more interesting to me to hear about faction leaders when they're representing the interests of their political leanings of whatever factions they have, their expectations they have for their society and their race, and their interests are, and how that leads them into conflict with others that inhabit the world, right? But when we're focusing on feelings, it's like you get less of that, right? There's less voice acting dedicated to maybe, say, the magic system and what kind of influences they might have on the world. Instead, but that's not what we got, right? It seems like we're maybe stepping a little bit away from that. I still think there is a little bit of space for that, so long as it's pertaining to the wider story, right? I think if what they want to do in the next expansion is kill off Illyria's kid or something, and that tips her over to the Void, I think that could be a more interesting dynamic in terms of storytelling, but for the most part, I'm mostly interested in the factions, right, and their expectations and their conflicts. seems like we're getting a little bit more focus on that, so I'm generally pretty positive about the story. One of the things that I was maybe a little bit skeptical about, or I am a little bit skeptical about, is their recent explanation on the forest trolls. It seems like they're not leading with a initial conflict. It almost feels like they're setting them up to be an allied race or something. I don't know. I'm not really a fan of the idea of having the Amani trolls be friendly. I think they were really great, really believable antagonists for the elves, and they kind of had a really great dynamic where they were enemies of the elves, not for shallow reasons or whatever, but it was kind of this really understandable conflict where it's like they're fighting over borders, right, and resources. And they have this bad blood. Instead, we're kind of moving towards this friendly approach, which I wasn't really a fan of. But aside from that, I think the light versus void is a really great dynamic. I really like the idea that maybe the light has its own interests and it's not necessarily always in line with the prosperity of others, right? Or the peace of the planet and the world and their factions. So I'm hoping that we get some really great conflicts out of that, and generally pretty positive. And the Horonir are, I find a little bit of uncomfortable overlap with Night Elves, but I think that's fine. I'm willing to look past it. It does sound like they have kind of interesting culture and interesting, they got their own version of oaths similar to the Ethereals, so that sounds pretty cool. And that's about it that I have for the story. So on to zones. The zones I thought were pretty great. I don't think there's ever been a time in WoW when I've been disappointed by the zones and the art design. So, I don't really think there's much worth covering here. It all seems pretty positive, so we're going to move on to housing, which is the kind of flagship feature, I think, of the expansion. And I think probably where they put the most amount of effort into. The housing seems to be pretty developed. There's a lot of kind of interesting philosophical ideas on how to get players to interact with each other in a setting that feels more social, and hopefully that, it's not really my focus, but I know that there's a lot of people who have kind of that complaint about modern MMOs, as they feel less social, and hopefully this is, for those guys, and kind of steps up that idea of kind of coming together and making friends or something. I don't know. Look, I'm not that guy, right? Couldn't tell you. But hopefully that works out. I do think housing is a really great opportunity to add collectibles. I think the whole kind of mini game of collecting things has gone a bit stale. I don't think a lot of people are all that interested in their 300th and whatever 80th mount they're on. I think once they get the mount that they think is cool and matches their character, for the most part they're fine with that. And I don't think toys are really all that interesting ever, but maybe some RP guys are still on about that. Not that that's like a bad thing to be into, but I think housing itself is much more compelling as a reward loop, and having the ability to display that in some kind of environment and kind of express some kind of personal expression or whatever they could have in that kind of setting, and have some form of game loop that kind of makes them feel prideful in their achievements, and there's like a physical expression, at least in as far as a 3D world could be physical, right? So I think that'll be good. I think I'm saying I think a lot, but bear with me. Next is allied races. I think we pretty much covered this already in the story, but we're getting Harneer and probably most likely the Forest Trolls, which I'm not really crazy about either of them. I think we have a lot of other races that are more interesting and more unique to bring into the story, but I understand kind of Blizzard's focus on their immediate narrative, right? And that's kind of ties in a little bit better than maybe something like ogres, right? It's just not like it's not a lot of ogres in Quel'Thalas or something. But look, I look past it, right? That's what they want to do, fine. Right? Now on to Delves. Delves, as you can imagine, I have a lot more investment into. This was actually kind of disappointing for me. I was not really happy to hear that we're kind of sticking with the same formula. I don't think Delves are bad per se. It's just that they don't have great repeatability, right? I really wish they would just switch to something like Torghast, where they had some procedurally generated content, because I get that people might like delves more than Torghast, but when you're doing your 10,000th delve because that's your progression content, it tends to get pretty stale. There's only so many times you can do each scenario over and over and over again. So this is kind of my biggest critique that I have for Blizzard, is that they're spending so much time trying to develop things that they already have solutions for in the form of content they've done previously, right? I'm not saying the need to do Torghast specifically, right? But something with some kind of space that's procedurally generated, environment. Less focus on these, weird quest objectives that just exist to get you to kill some random mob, in the middle of nowhere, right? And something that's more linear, some kind of hallway with a bunch of enemies that you run through and you kill the enemies, and it leads you to the boss, right? And it's different procedurally generated spaces, so that it feels unique, and you're not doing the same thing over and over again. As well as some traps along the way that you have to avoid. Something that gets you moving more, paying attention, rather than the monotony of I've done this, I've rescued this hostage 50 billion time, right? I know where he is, because he's always there, right? He's never going to be somewhere else. The other thing that I was really not happy to hear about was that we're kind of getting rid of Bran, or that we're getting a new companion that's replacing Bran. Now, I don't have a problem with new companions, it's just I feel like the point of the companion system was to have variety, and it almost kind of feels like, or it should feel like, you're going out and you're recruiting different agents for your team, right? And they have kind of different strengths and weaknesses, and there's a kind of a big choice there, right? Because they're going to have different synergies. they're gonna affect how you interact with the delve differently. But instead we spent all this time developing Bran, and we're just gonna eliminate him. I guess that's never gonna happen. So that was really disappointing. That was at least my takeaway from the panel with the wording they used. Maybe that's not what they're doing, but I'm pretty sure that's what they said, right? Again, this kind of feels like Blizzard kind of shooting themselves in the foot, where they kind of, they could have just kept things. They could have just kept Bran, and then that would have been like an extra companion you could pick between. But instead, they were just kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and reinventing the wheel is for what feels like reinvention's sake, right? So that's it for delves. On to dungeons. There's going to be 4 level up dungeons and 4 max level dungeons. I don't know that I'm really going to cover this all that much. I don't really do a lot of dungeons, so I don't really have a big dog in this race. Whatever they want to do, I think it's fine, so long as there's NPC versions. I really don't really care all that much. Now on to raids. Raids, they are going to break up the raids, so there's not going to be like these huge raids with like 10 or 9 or whatever bosses. Instead they're going to make 3 smaller raids, which I think is a good decision. I think, from what little raids that I have done, a lot of it is kind of the same environment, so can kind of get a little samey. They often have a lot of the same mechanics because they have this overarching theme, but when all 9 or so bosses have to adhere to the theme, they kind of can feel a little samey. So again, not really a big dog in this race, but I hope that they are going to have the NPC story mode, which I think they said that's what they're going to do, so which is probably better for solo players, because now we're going to get 3 last bosses for every patch instead of 1. On to Demon Hunter getting a 3rd spec. I think part of me was kind of disappointed to hear that we're not getting a new class. Instead, we're getting a new spec, which I think it would have been really cool to have a class that was dedicated to the Void, like something like a cultist or something. I think out of all the cosmological threats, I think maybe even the Void deserved it the most. But anyways, we're instead getting Demon Hunter. The spells do look pretty interesting. I think the idea behind the mechanics sound pretty cool. I do have a pretty big issue with the fact that the Void form, or the Demon Hunter form for the Void spec, is like just this purple demon. Like, they didn't even make a new model. It's just like they took the green from Demon Hunter and then they just painted it purple, which is kind of disappointing. I think they have precedence lore-wise to have like this Void Walker, because I think Void Walkers are somehow fel aligned, so it could have been the case that you just transformed into a giant Void Walker or something. At least I think that's how it works, because I mean, Warlocks can summon Void Walkers, right? So I think that's how the lore works, anyways. But instead, you're just a purple Demon Hunter that shoots glowy stars and stuff. So, a little disappointed there. On to our next topic, which is talents. The unfortunate reality is we're not getting any new hero talent trees, which was kind of disappointing because they're quite well done and they're kind of really compelling choices, and they do change up your gameplay quite a bit. But instead, we are getting extra talent points for your existing trees. So you're getting 3 for your class tree, you're getting 3 for your hero talent trees, and you're getting 3 or 4 for your spec tree. I'm kind of concerned here that we have what already feels like too many talent points for each tree. I mean, I feel like I have like 3 out of my 4 capstones already unlocked, and now that we're getting another 3 points, I don't even know what I'd spend them on. And as like for the gameplay that this kind of results in is like, I kind of feel like we already have too many active effects flying around. I mean, it feels like my character is just shooting random stuff off that I don't really have any control over. And I think that's largely the result of having too many talent points that you have that you can spend on. And I'm not really convinced that people want to, that the best form of gameplay is just buying a bunch of cooldowns and then cramming them all into a cast sequence macro. I feel like the point of the system should be to buy 1 cooldown as opposed to 3. So this kind of feels like we're going to be making that problem worse. Now this is a little, I suppose this is slightly alleviated by the fact that they are adding a capstone, which takes like 3 or 4 talent points each, but I don't think they're adding too many of them. I think there's only 1, so it's like you're either going to pick between having this new talent point or just having all of your pre-existing ones, right, at the same time. For clarity's sake here, I'm not saying that we have too many choices inside of the trees, rather that we have too many points to buy all of them at the same time, and I think the result is you can kind of feel too samey because everyone's buying the same things because they're not forced to pick between any of them. They don't have to make any hard choices because we just have enough points to buy everything, so why not buy everything, right? The prey feature is another one of those things that I don't really understand why we're making when we have Island Expedition AI, which does basically exactly what they want the prey feature to do, and they do it in basically real time. It's not like they're simulating hunting, you know what I mean? They will actually just run around the map and look for the player. I'm not sure. It doesn't make any sense to me why we're spending all this time to make the prey AI, which is just gonna randomly spawn on top of you, when the actual thing exists and they're pretty competent at creating difficulty for the player. I mean, they will interrupt you, they'll kite you, they'll run from you when they're in danger, they'll try and heal, they'll, you know, you basically have to do a little bit of PvP tactics in order to beat them. But you know, so it doesn't make any sense to me why we're spending all this time on something that not only exists, but it's going to exist better than what they're making in the prey feature. So I mean, again, with this idea that they're kind of trying to reinvent the wheel here, I'm not sure why we can't just use the enemy AI. I mean, it works perfectly for the task, but for whatever reason, Blizzard just, I don't know, man. Now, the positive part of this feature is that when you undergo this prey assignment, you will increase the difficulty of the open world content, and I feel like this is pretty much a pretty positive thing. I mean, the worst part of farming keys for delves is that you just have to do this boring, generic content that is not really challenging enough for you to pay attention, and yeah, I feel like this is a pretty positive aspect of the feature. So, I mean, even if we don't get good enemy AI in terms of like the actual prey assault, the actual, you know, NPCs attacking the player, I do think that this is a pretty big win in terms of overall world content, and it's at least solving a problem that currently exists. Next is the low-level leveling campaign, and I think this is actually a pretty good idea and solves a problem that Blizzard has, where they have this disjointed and disconnected narrative at the early levels, so it's hard for people to get into not only their character in the world, but, you know, for new players to kind of get behind the story of WoW, and you're just jumping through all these different timelines, and you're really confused as to what's happening and where you are in the story. So I think for the purposes of immersion, this is a pretty big win, and I'm overall pretty positive about this idea. The only thing that I'd hope they do is that they tell the more, you know, the actual parts of the story that are pertaining to what's happening, and not like something silly like the recent Arathi questline, right? So let's hope they don't do that and they stick to the actual story at hand. Next is PvP, and this is a exception to their rule of not investing into things that they already have when it's working. So we're getting a update to Comp Stomp, and they're actually adding more battlegrounds to it, as well as making it always available, which is really great, because, you know, everyone's got these macros that they don't even know if it's working in PvP, but they can't really pay attention to it because they're trying to not take a sword to the face. There we go. So another big win for WoW. Next feature is UI. This is another pretty positive thing. I think add-ons are really bad for the game. One thing I am a little concerned about is that I don't actually think that they should make the UI implements they're adding to be maybe too competent. I'd rather not be in a position where we're getting rid of add-ons, but we're just like adding to them to the game anyways. But that's a possibility, but we're not there yet. So overall, pretty positive. Last is transmog changes, and this is again, fortunately, another pretty positive change. I mean, the idea that you're going to be able to have different transmogs for different scenarios and different environments is pretty exciting, especially for roleplay purposes. And, you know, I'm not a role player myself, but I'm sure those guys are over the moon. So big win for them, big win for everyone, and a pretty positive thing to end off the list of features and my interpretation of them. So overall, I think my takeaway from the whole reveal was that it just, you know, you get some good with some bad, right? And you know, I think even though I think this video might have come across pretty negative, I think, you know, I am pretty optimistic about WoW, and I think they've been making a lot of good decisions, even if they haven't been making the right decisions for the problem. I think them trying at least to solve these problems is a good sign for the game, and I think we can at least be positive about that, right? They might not nail everything off the bat, and I think, to be honest, that sometimes they just, instead of taking a right turn, they just take a left turn like 3 times. Instead, they could have just made a right in the first place, but that's Blizz. They're a pretty creative group, but sometimes that's a double-edged sword, right? Anyways, that's it. Pretty long video, but I hope someone found value in this. If not, I did, because it helped me think and conceptualize what I think about the actual expansion. Yeah, that's it. Peace.